So welcome back everyone to DUPS Discussions. This is our last episode for 2020, and hopefully everything will be a lot better in 2021. Let's fingers crossed and everything. But today we're speaking with Dr. Anne Keidel, and then what's it called? As always, make sure you check out our social media. We do post the questions a few days before, asking questions for whoever we're speaking to. And then we'll also be looking into posting these episodes somewhere else than Blackboard, because we've had a few issues with that. So keep up for social media to find out what we do there. But I think our first question will just be, what is your main research area? I feel like that's a good question just to figure out what you're interested in.
Yeah, so my main research area, I would say the super broad area is cognitive neuroscience, but that can be quite a few things. But I'm generally interested in the brain and brain mechanisms, and then the second part of that is cognition. So I do lots of different things. I'm sure lots of people do lots of different things, but I'm mainly interested in auditory cognition. So when we listen to music or when we listen to speech, and how the brain mechanisms can basically help us to understand music and speech, or rhythms. So it's quite basic cognitive questions. It ties into language, which is a huge topic itself, but I'm more interested in very, very basic processes. So what is it in the speech signal that can help us to understand the speech? Or then also, if we see the speaker that we're talking to, how does seeing the speaker's lips help us to understand speech? And to maybe figure out better what someone is saying. If the quality, like what we do right now, if the quality sometimes isn't very good when we do online when we have online conversations. So how does the lips of the speaker help us to make sense of what's being said? And I've also done a few things that brings a bit further. So for example, in people with cochlear implants, so who are maybe deaf from birth, and they get cochlear implants, how good are their chances of successfully being able to understand speech, because the speech signal is very degraded that they hear. So there are lots of applications of what I'm doing, but auditory cognitive neuroscience, I think, is the main area.
I saw on your the people page on My Dundee that you used to do some infant cognition as well. I mean, I find it really interesting that you did kind of one research area and then moved into another, but you're still really young.
Yeah.
So how did that kind of happen, and how did you make that decision?
Oh yeah, so like how I got here is like not linear at all. It's not straightforward at all. And so after my degree, I really wanted to do a PhD, and I knew that I really wanted to do brain sciences and neuroscience. And then I saw this advert from the Max Planck Institute. So that's like a great institution if you want to do a PhD or if you want to work as a researcher. They've got great resources, and yeah, it's a great institution. So I thought I want to go there. And the advert said that it was infant research, but also EEG, so neuroscience with the caps and recording babies' brain activity. So I thought, yeah, I can work with babies, that's fine. But then I got the job, and it turned out that they just put that in there, the EEG part, and it wasn't really planned. So then I was a bit disappointed, but I managed to then convince them that I could still learn EEG. So I got what I wanted. But the main research I did as a PhD student was with infants and toddlers' action perception. So where we would just show them a very simple action on screen, like grasping something, and then we would record their eye movements. So the main method was eye movements, and it was quite interesting because the idea is that if the infant looks at the goal of the action, like a toy or something, before the hand reaches it, then it has anticipated the goal of the action and it can understand the action. And very young infants don't do that; they just follow the hand. So that was like the main paradigm that I used. And then, as I said, I met some people, and they let me do an EEG study in their lab. So in the end, I did learn EEG, but it wasn't really part of my PhD. And I always wanted to do neuroscience. So after that, I decided to try and do what I really wanted to do. And so I went to Glasgow without having anything, but because I contacted people there, and yeah, I knew some people there, and so eventually I got postdocs that allowed me to do neuroscience.
So you're from Germany, right?
Yeah.
And I think Max Planck is in Germany as well, right?
Most of the institutes are in Germany. They also have some in the US and in the Netherlands, but yeah, mainly
How
Germany.
did you, so when you applied for Glasgow, was it mainly because of the people? So who was actually there? Or were you more so just drawn to the program and the resources that they had? Or like, how does that work?
So it was like so many things. It was just a coincidence, because so I already had a family during, like, I had 2 kids during my PhD. So we were always going to go somewhere as a family. And my husband is also a researcher, so he got a job in Glasgow. So the place was settled then. And then I just met with people there, and it turned out they did great research that I was really interested in. And then because I've met with them, and they just gave me a chance, and then just one thing led to another, and I got eventually I got positions there.
Okay, okay, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I always wonder like how do people move around with researchers? Like how does that all happen? Because I find it quite interesting.
Yeah, so
Um,
I always wanted to go to the UK or to Scotland. So it was good that we settled on Scotland and then on Glasgow then. So that was a decision the two of us made together. And then I was just so lucky that Glasgow also worked out for me.
yeah, definitely. I've heard a lot about, I mean, I've spoken to Chris about it as well, and I've heard a lot about the EEG studies that they do there as well.
Yeah.
So I find that really interesting. One thing I always wonder though with like EEG projects is that of course it's a lot of just generally with like brain cognition, it's a lot of technology that's used. So typically I would assume that the funding and those kind of things is a bit there's more needed for different kinds of studies with technology. So how does it work getting funding for those projects? And is there anything that's maybe different than another study that doesn't need that kind of equipment?
Well, usually, so for the most part of your career, you would do the studies in a lab that's already there. So then you wouldn't need to apply for any extra funding. It's problematic when there's no lab where you want to do your research, no EEG lab, for example. But usually, like, EEG is not that expensive to set up, maybe about £40,000. So usually universities can fund that lab, and then it's there, and then you can do your research there. And you just need a little bit of things. You always need participant money, but no matter what you do with what kind of studies you do. And maybe these studies take a bit longer, so you need a little bit more participant money, but that's not that much. And then you sometimes need consumables, so it's just in case one of the electrodes breaks or the caps are too old or things like that. So that's a little bit you have to add on top of the money that you want to apply for, but it's not that much because you would always go to a place that already has an EEG lab. And we've got
Is it
2 now
typical?
here, so yeah.
Is it typical for like, for example, like the like different funding bodies, like the I can't remember what it's called, but the EREC, I think it's called, like the Council and those kind
Yeah.
of bodies. Are they typically interested in funding that kind of research, or do you have any like sense of what kind of projects with EEG they're most interested in?
So there are so many different funding bodies, and they're all interested in different things. So the ESR, yeah, what you said, that one, that's for like the social part. And I usually apply to the BBSSC, that is the like biological sciences one. And then there is like the MRC, the medical one, if you have like clinical questions. And I think they're all extremely interested in EEG research. It is more difficult to, I think, to get the kind of money for behavioral studies, because you have to come up with a like really, really amazing paradigm and studies. And I think it's more difficult if you only do behavioral paradigms, because they need to be just completely perfect. And there's so many difficulties when you want to set up a study, and you need to do pilot studies to see that the paradigm works. And with EEG, I think it's a bit easier, because you often use paradigms that already exist for behavioral studies, and then you just apply that to the into an EEG context and see what's happening in the brain. But in my experience, all of these research councils are extremely interested in EEG or other kind of neuroscientific studies. Yeah.
I also wondered, I think I cut you off a bit, but you were speaking about how the Dundee University, they have an EEG lab as well. I was wondering, is it your lab, and then how did you guys set it up? Like, how does the process of, applying to set up a lab or whatever, how does that even work?
Yeah, I think it's usually if they hire new people that do this kind of research and there's no lab, then that's part of these new appointments, this startup package. So Chris and I were appointed at the same time in the same round, and so they knew that we both do neuroscience, and there was one EG lab here before, but we also knew that for 3 people that wouldn't be enough. It would just be too many people doing studies. So yeah, we got this, we got the funding for that from the university, and that was quite good. We were just very lucky that they were interested in our kind of research, and they also understood that we need another lab. So now we share a lab together, and we just got all the parts delivered and then had to set it up, and it's still not 100% done, and everything always takes longer than you expect. But yeah, we managed, and so yeah, we also learned a lot how to set these things up ourselves, and yeah, we just did that. It took a long time, but yeah, now we have a working EEG lab. So once we can test again, we can test again.
Yeah, I think I was in the lab just before like COVID-19 all started. I was helping Chris with a PhD student, and then yeah, everything got shut
Yeah,
down shortly after I started.
I know. Yeah, I know. I was in the same situation. So we had everything set up for a study that we wanted to do, like just the up like down to the last thing, and the like trial recording or pilot recording, and everything was done. And that was on Friday, and we had participants invited for the next week, for the whole next week, and but the Friday was also when everything shut down. So we were all ready to go. Chris's the PhD students, and also my project all ready to go, and then yeah, we had to
Have
stop.
you been able to have you been able to do any kind of work on it at all over this, like the last, what, 8 months?
No, so for the first 4 months we weren't even allowed in the lab. So I was really glad once I could go into the lab, because the batteries have to get charged constantly, and we switch the batteries every week because we have two. Because if they are just left without charge for a while, they don't work anymore, and that's really expensive to get that fixed. So I was really anxious to go back, and after 4 months, but both batteries still worked, so that was good. And now I just go in there once a week to change the batteries, to change which battery gets charged. And I look at it and I think, oh, it would be so nice to be able to test, but we can't. That's so EG research is even less possible than other research, because we have to get really close to the participants to put on the cap and put in the electrodes and everything. So at the moment, there's no way we can do these studies. We just had to wait and just hope that we can still do everything once we are allowed to, and that it's not too late. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of when you'll even be able to go back to it, or even start doing like smaller studies? I don't even know when that would be possible.
Yeah, I think EEG will be the last thing that comes back, and probably I'm hoping March, but I think even that is quite optimistic. So maybe April. And I have quite a few research assistants who are also keen to get going and learn to do EEG. And I always have to tell them, sorry, hopefully early next year. But yeah, we'll see. It might even be possible that some of them are in fourth year that they won't even be able to learn that at all, because we're not going to be able to start testing before they are finished. But yeah, I think we can do maybe behavioral studies earlier than that, because theoretically we can keep 2 meters distance and we do behavioral study, but EEG is going to take a while.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any, I'm thinking of like, I'm in fourth year, of course. So I'm always thinking, how can you kind of use the time between, after exams until the school year begins again? What can you do? And of course, in fourth year, dissertation is probably what I'm going to be doing. But I'm thinking for like first year, second year, and third year, do you have any ideas of what students could be doing just to get better at, psychology, or like explore something more, or like get better at some kind of research methods? Do you have any suggestions?
What do you mean, during COVID or just generally?
Just generally. I mean,
Yeah.
also now during COVID, but generally as well.
Um, so I think things like internships are like these are the things where you learn the most, like really intense things that go on where you go into a field for several weeks and you really see what it's like, and you can learn whether it's something for you. So you can do these research internships. Some of them are funded, but you could even just, if you can afford it, do an unpaid research internship, which is, I think, what students for the last 100 years have been doing. I have done that a lot as well. And so you can go into a lab here at ND, or even any other kind of area that you're interested in. You could ask whether you can do an internship, maybe even an unpaid one. And I think people usually welcome students happily. And yeah, for example, here in the lab, if you were to ask any of us, any of the lecturers, you could see what's like the day-to-day life is like in research, and help to test participants when it's possible, or see how what data analysis is like. Other things you have to consider, like when setting up paradigms. So that could be useful if you consider research, or if you want to learn more about a specific area, because by doing something, by like really getting into a study, you learn so much about that field, more so than if you just have a lecture on something. And then there are so many other possibilities. Like I did 2 internships during my degree, where I went in a clinical environment. So one was in a practice, and the other one was at a clinic in the like psychosomatic uh, like field, or station, and that was really eye-opening for me. And that was really good. So I just like contacted them. I phoned up lots of practices, and then with one of them I got lucky, and they took me. I think it was a 6-week internship I did there over the summer, and I learned so much. Like they let me do a lot of things, like doing the entry interviews with patients, or even writing the applications for them to get the like funding from the health insurance. So things that a clinical psychologist does on a day-to-day basis, I got insights into all of these things. And I noticed that it's not for me. So it was really, really helpful. It saved me years
When
of
was
potentially
this?
doing something else.
Was that during your bachelor's, or like your PhD, or what kind
Yeah,
of
that was
time frame
doing
was
my
this?
at university. So I when I did my degree, it was a different system in Germany. So we didn't
Oh,
have bachelor and masters. It was called a diploma, but it was like an advanced master's thing. And it was divided into like pre-diploma and main diploma, but you didn't really have the flexibility of doing an undergraduate and then deciding what you want to do next. So it was always just one streamlined program with exams in the middle and exams at the end. And that's during that time, during the like main diploma, which is maybe a bit comparable with the MSc. During that time, during 3 summers, I did these different internships after my undergraduate or pre-diploma. But I think now, like with the structure here, which we now also have in Germany, I think it makes more sense to do that during your undergraduate.
Yeah, definitely. It's also, I think, the thing I like about Scotland as well is in Denmark, where I'm from, it's 3 years, but I like it in Scotland that it's 4 years because you kind of have more time to play around with different things and kind of figure out more so what you're interested in as well. I quite like that you have that like you have like a safe frame to figure out what you're most interested in. And I mean, a university is generally quite a safe frame to figure out these things.
Yeah, I especially like the Scottish system with where you have these different topics, elected modules in your first 2 years. I think I would have loved that, just to go, try out like literature or film studies or learn a new language. I would have like loved that really. So I really like that. Well, I was going to say something else. Yeah, I don't remember now, but so I really would have enjoyed that. And I went to different classes just for fun during my like pre-diploma, just to see what it's like, which of course meant I didn't have to take exams, but I think here I would be interested in so many things, and so you can see what you like. And yeah, if you get good advice on what makes sense for you, then I think this can be a really, really useful thing to study all these different things.
When you started your pre-diploma, like I'm not sure how this worked, but do you apply to like a specific like topic or like for example, do you apply to like psychology or how did that work?
Yeah, so you could put in assign one if you get in. So that was a system back then. I'm not sure how it works now. But we didn't have like it was psychology as a broad field, but then we didn't have things like research methods as an extra thing. It was included in the whole degree, but now students can choose, like after the undergraduate, they can choose more specifically the things that they're interested in. I'm not sure that's a good thing, especially not for students who just don't know what they want to do when there are quite a few. But so it was this broad psychology degree, and you basically learned the same things, maybe because it was 4 to 6 years of just psychology. It's even more detailed with some of the topics, but it was very similar to what you learn today.
So
Definitely.
because you mentioned as well, like it is, I guess it is difficult to figure out what you kind of want to do. Like some people, of course, know exactly what they want to do, and they go
Yeah.
to university, they figure out even more, and then they go on to in that field. But I was wondering when you applied to the pre-diploma, did you know, like, did you just kind of enjoy psychology and you wanted to figure out more about it, or did you like have a specific plan where you wanted to
No,
go with it?
no, I didn't really have a plan. It was just so in before I applied, it was between biology and psychology, and it was like basically a coin toss because I didn't really know. And then I heard that biology is really, really difficult. So then I thought maybe just apply for a psychology, and I didn't really have any idea what that included. Um, that much. I just thought I'm interested in people. I want to learn more about people, and maybe also the vague idea that I want to help people. Because usually, often people think that psychology is about clinical psychology or becoming a therapist. So maybe that's also drove me. But then I very quickly noticed that that's not for me. Like the clinical side, or just working with patients. I noticed also during these internships that it's so hard and it takes such a big toll. And if you can't cope with all the things that you hear, then I think it would have really I would have taken all the things home that I hear, and it would have really, really made it difficult for me. So I knew that that wasn't my thing. And then I didn't know what to do for a few years during my degree, but I just stuck with it because I didn't want to just stop. And then I discovered research. So after this pre-diploma thing, we had this seminar where we did a study, like a research study, and the students had to come up with a paradigm and then test participants and analyze the data, so the whole thing. And that's when I fell in love with the research, and I knew that's what I want to do. Just this whole like, thinking about problems and problem solving and trying to figure out the best way how to find out what's actually happening and why people do what they do or perceive what they perceive, you know. And that's when I knew I wanted to do research. And then I was really happy, and the rest of my degree was quite good because I knew what I wanted to do.
I guess you could also say research is like a more indirect way of helping people. Like you figure out things so that therapists can apply it and actually help people, like, you know, directly, but you kind of provide some of the knowledge, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's true. So I ended up doing very basic research, but even that, so my plans for the future are to also help, for example, people with dyslexia, and to very, very early on diagnose people who might end up having developmental language problems. So yeah, I mean, that's far into the future. But yeah, so that's could then help people. That's true. Yeah.
when you say that it's like into the future, do you have any like plans of how to get there? Because I'm always
Yes.
interested, like, because I guess for me, I see as like, you know, once you're like in the research, like I really like research personally. So once you're in the research field, I kind of see, okay, like you've achieved it, you know, like you've gotten there. And it's also kind of interesting to see, you know, what's the next step then once you've gotten there, I guess.
Yeah. So for these kind of big projects, you always need funding. And I've been trying to get this funded for a while now, but I've always aimed very high. So the last thing I did was apply for 1.5 million from the European Research Council, which of course was extremely competitive, and I got very close to getting it, but then I didn't get it. And now I've submitted another big grant, again almost 1 million to the BBRCC. So hopefully at some point I get lucky enough and this will get funded, and then I will have all the resources and also um, funding for a postdoc and for research assistants, so that I can then actually do this. I guess I could try and start very like slowly with baby steps and doing like student projects or something like that. So if a student was interested in that for the dissertation, then we could do that. But I also, especially for EEG experiments, I like to pay participants because they're sitting there for 2 hours and they have to wash their hair afterwards. So it's not just doing a 20-minute behavioral study. It takes some time, and for that you need to pay participants. And so there's always a little money that you need, even though we have everything, like the lab is there, but participant money can be a problem. So I need to get the money for that from somewhere. But yeah, I'm hoping to be lucky, and it comes down to luck, really. So that's like one of these big grants at some point will get funded, and then I can really do everything at once and that I've specified in the grant.
How do you start planning an application like that? Like £1 million, that I mean, that's a lot. So how do you kind of like, you'll have to structure everything out, right? So you know exactly like where the money's going. So they like the research body knows that. But how do you actually sit down and start making an application like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's I think at some point you just have to sit down and like scribble down ideas. And then once you've I just got started with an idea, then you can carve it out more and more. And because this was not a second time I've tried to apply for the same or a similar project, so having gone through it once really helped, and then the next time I could carve it out even more, and so everything got more and more convincing and like solid over time. But it usually takes a long time to write a convincing and interesting proposal that everyone understands, because usually the people who look at the grants are often, or the ones, at least the ones who decide on your grants, are not from the field. So you have to make it sound reasonable for everyone, even if it's not from your field. That can be really tricky. I think that having an idea is the most important bit, and that is, yeah, sometimes you just have to sit down and start scribbling and start doing mind maps. So you know, things that you've done before, how can you combine these things, and things you're interested in, and then just be creative, which is a part that I also really like.
Yeah, I guess it's like the problem solving, like figuring out what you want to do and then how to get there and like all the different kind of steps it takes.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, problem solving is a huge part of being a researcher, because there are always hurdles and there are always things that you didn't consider and that come up, and then you have to rethink and think, okay, how do I solve that? And also programming. That's also why I like programming so much, because it's also problem solving. Like, it's very logical, and the computer only does what you want it to do, but then it doesn't work, and you have to figure out why it doesn't work. But I really, really enjoy this kind of logical problem solving thing.
Yeah, I'm slowly realizing as well that a lot of, I guess, psychology or like research psychology is quite dependent on programming. Um, well, I guess, do you have any tips for students who are interested in that? Because I find it quite difficult, actually, programming.
So I think it's really hard to learn completely by yourself. So when I started, I just was given this script that from a previous study, and as a PhD student, I was told, you program your new study based on that. So, and that was with MATLAB, and it's just, you know, text lines of code of text. I was like, whoa. But then I just sat together with a friend of mine who'd done this before, and we went through every single line and tried to figure out what's happening there. And that was really helpful. Although nowadays, so I give my research assistants, I have this like resource for them, basically like a tutorial. Like, it starts at the very beginning with MATLAB, and they just put in very basic things and see what's happening. So it's very, very basic, and there are a lot of these resources online for every software that you or programming language that you might want to use, and videos and YouTube. A friend of mine recently said, I think it's quite known among scientists, that there's no programming without Googling. And that's really, you can't know everything, and you forget things so quickly once you haven't used things for a while, like specific functions or how to do things. And so a big part is just Googling it.
That's kind of nice to hear because I've tested MATLAB and I guess I felt a little bit stupid because I kept testing different things and I had to keep Googling it because I
Yeah, no,
didn't know what
that's
was going on.
normal. That's very, very normal. But once you do that, once you start Googling, it's fine.
Yeah, you
um,
figure out a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. But also when you see MATLAB for the first time, I really remember seeing it for the first time, and I was so overwhelmed because just that whole idea of these lines and what's happening and what is a variable and what is a function, and just figuring that out is so difficult. But once you get into it, so once you know one programming language, it's so easy to adapt this knowledge to another one. So then everything just makes more sense. And
Yeah,
that's
that
really
makes.
nice.
I guess you learn a new language. It's like the coding language. Once you've learned it, you can kind of use it in different ways.
Exactly, because all the programming languages basically do the same thing. You have the same principles, but the kind of the words, the vocabulary is slightly different, or the syntax is slightly different, but it's basically doing the same thing. So when I'm quite proficient in MATLAB now after years and years of using it, and when I learned R, I just noticed that it was so many same things, so many similar things, and it was quite easy to learn that then as well.
Yeah. I have one last question that's very relevant right now. Do you have any good exam tips for students? I, I mean, exam week just started.
Yeah. Well, I think for the main tips, it's kind of too late now, because that would be to like study in study groups. So study groups was what really made it huge difference for me, meeting up with people, which is not possible at the moment, but just going through questions and going through topics and discussing them and connecting this with other things you've learned somewhere else. So making these connections between things, that was super important and super helpful for me. Now that it's exam week, Googling again is so helpful, and Wikipedia. So if there's something you haven't quite understood, or when you want to write something down, explain something, you often notice that you haven't quite understood a topic, because only when you want to tell it or write it down, you notice that you yourself need to understand it better. And then Wikipedia or just Google helps so much. And just generally being proactive. So I think students, so we also now get a lot of emails from students, and I teach in first 3 levels this year. So I get emails from level 1, 2, and 3. And yeah, very often students are quite just focused on the slides, for example. And of course, from the slides or maybe even from the recordings, it's not, sometimes you need more material to really get to the bottom of something, to really understand something, and then just Googling this yourself is like could be a big help, because you can't ask us anymore about like specific topics or specific answers, but being proactive is always like a really good thing, and not just narrowly looking at like the slides, for example.
So if you had like an exam week, like of course we have the replacement exams because of COVID and everything. So it's kind of, you have like a full 7 days basically to kind of write out, the 1,000-word essays or whatever it is. What do you think your structure of your day would be? Like if that's the only thing, like if that's the main thing, maybe you have a job on the side or something, but if that's the main thing, how do you think you would structure your day? Like how much time would you put into each of them, do you think?
Well, if we I think the worst case are the students at the moment with probably the most assignments are the level 3 students, because they have 4 modules where they have to write these essays. So I think for those students, without studying beforehand, it's almost not possible because you have to have a good idea when you see the questions. The best thing is always when you already have kind of a rough idea of the answer. If you don't have that, then that's really a bad thing. But let's assume that students studied beforehand and they have a rough idea. Probably I'd start out with 1 day per essay. So that would leave you 3 days for as a backup if you have the weekend, if you can work at the weekend. And then, yeah, just trying to have a rough draft within 1 day, and then do this for the other exam replacements and essays as well, and then finalize these like in the last few days. Make notes of what you need to find out still. I think starting to write is the first thing. Just put everything on there. And often, so in exams, what I often see when we still had exams, that usually the students did quite well who put up an outline, just some bullet points at the beginning, and we could still see that. And then they would have an outline, and then they would just start writing and go through their outline. I think these students usually did really well. So I think that's a good idea to do that with just a few notes, things that you remember, and structure these at the beginning, and probably 1 whole day per essay to get a main thing done that you could maybe, if you wouldn't have any more time, even if you submitted that, it would still be okay maybe, and then work on the next thing, but then finalize things towards during the last days, to make it really easily understandable and put in all the references and things like that. That would probably be my approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Yeah.
also I know I said it was not going to be my last question, but now I'm kind of curious. So how, like, of course, it's really important to be proactive, and also you mentioned like study groups are really, really, really nice to have as well before. How do you like year and even just now as well, how do you normally study? Like, for example, like with the lectures and everything from the beginning of a semester, because we're also starting a new semester soon. So how do you kind of from day one kind of like plan out your like studying, I guess you could say?
Well, I think to have a plan is always the best thing. To also to stay on top of things. So I've got my my weekly plan, where I put down like everything I need to do during that week. And of course, things get added all the time, but also importantly with like, I don't know whether you can see that with an assigned day and how important it is, and an assigned like morning or afternoon, because very often there's things you need to do first, but there's things you have to remember to do later, and then having like assigned a day or a time when I'm going to do that means I can focus on the things I have to do now, and then I know it's there, so I won't forget it. So that really was my savior during the last years when things got super, super busy. And I think as a student, that would have been helpful for me as well, just to have a plan. And I think if you can like start at the very beginning of the semester and meet up with some students from the same module and just discuss what you've learned and try to make connections between the things and just try to rehearse the things, that would be ideal if you start like in the first week and just have like one set time or date that you're going to meet with some students online at the moment and you discuss a lecture. That would be perfect. Probably at the beginning of the semester the exams are really far away, so you don't really do that, but maybe starting at some point during the semester to do that and to just go through the textbook, for example, and try to explain each other things. And there will always be things that someone says, I didn't quite understand that, and then someone else can try and you come to a solution together. So yeah, this would be ideal. And yeah, having like a plan probably now, something on your phone would be even cooler, but I like the old-fashioned way. Having a plan when things are happening and when assignments are due is so important, because very often we get we hear from students and they just forgot things and it was so much and they just forgot assignments or quizzes or whatever. So this kind of structuring your week is super important.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I think those are really interesting tips. I'm definitely learning a lot that I need to do differently. So that was quite nice. But thank you so much for doing this. And everyone listening as well, thank you for so much for listening. I know it's the last episode, but it would be great if you guys could give us any feedback as well. I've gotten some over the last few weeks or months, but it'd be great to get some more just before we start next semester as well. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.